And we have a lot of doctors here in case anything happens. What was that?
We're missing Pinky Schumacher.
Oh, yeah.
Blessed memory. I meant to ask you, is Tyler in private school?
No, Tyler's here.
Oh, he
Yeah,
is?
yeah.
Okay, good.
All good, all good.
So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our moderator, our facilitator, our guest of honor, our speaker this afternoon, Todd Richmond,
All right.
our annual Todd Talks.
I could take this off,
You
right?
can take it off because we're all socially distant.
Great. Well, I hope everybody, hope as always, that we make this a very interactive talk. So I will begin. So, Shana Tova. When I was 5, I missed one of my big, oh, sorry, that's the rabbi speech. Sorry, When I was 51 and I was sleeping before I got here, I was thinking, oh, I'm going to miss my big shot. So I'm going to talk a little bit, as I normally do, and I'm kind of broke it up into a bunch of different topics that deal with Israel, a little bit with the Middle East as well. Please interrupt as much as you want, because that makes this much more exciting and much more fun to talk about. So recently we just saw the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, come to the United States for a very important summit between Israel and the United States. And prior to the Prime Minister coming, he set the stage by meeting with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, sometimes known as Tony Blinken, the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. He also spoke on the phone with the Speaker of the House, House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, and the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Setting the tone for this during his meeting with Secretary Blinken, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, and we were just talking about this before, about setting a new tone, "I bring from Israel a new spirit, a spirit of folks who sometimes harbor different opinions, but can work together in cooperation and goodwill, in a spirit of unity, and we work hard to find common things we do agree upon and move forward on. And it seems to be working," which is somewhat different than previously, as this is a much more diverse government than they had previously. On the agenda, of course, always on the agenda with any Israeli Prime Minister, is the issue of Iran, the Iranian threat. The Prime Minister told his cabinet early in the week that he will present an orderly plan formulated to curtail the Iranians, both in the nuclear sphere as well as vis-a-vis regional aggression. In addition, the Prime Minister said that he would and did address fortifying Israel's military superiority as well as economic issues such as high-tech, innovation, the crisis climate, and the fight against the coronavirus. Now, Huma Barnea, who writes for Yediot Aharonot, said that in addition to discussing the Iranian threat, the Prime Minister was going to also discuss two major requests. The first one was a request to grant Israel $1 billion in special aid to replenish its stores of Iron Dome, as we all saw what happened in the last crisis with Gaza, as well as a second request to grant a visa waiver for Israeli tourists traveling to the United States. So what are Israelis saying about this meeting? I thought it was kind of interesting to look at some writers for some of the papers. So Jonathan Liss in Haaretz writes, or talks about that one foreign policy official said that the picture that will emerge from this visit is the important event itself. It is a clear signal to Iran and world leaders that the new Prime Minister receives an American embrace and the same support from the White House as his predecessors. There's also an important message to Israelis about Bennett's standing as Prime Minister in the post-Netanyahu era. The change of government in Israel has not damaged the unity of interests between the two countries, actually just the opposite. Yes, in the last 4 years, the Israeli Prime Minister, along with President Trump, had a great relationship, and it was very important as we have a new president and a new Prime Minister to show that that relationship between these two countries still are extremely strong. And following the meeting last week, between Bennett and Biden, Israeli decision makers continue to remain focused, of course, on the Iranian threat. Defense Minister Benny Gantz told military correspondents last week that the cooperation with the United States and its intelligence sharing is only getting stronger, and they are working with them in order to establish a Plan B and to demonstrate that if there is no deal with Iran, other activities will begin, as President Biden said. And to take it a step further, Gantz said that he was prepared to accept a scenario in which the United States negotiates a fresh nuclear deal with Iran. This, of course, being very rare to hear a comment from any type of senior Israeli governmental official not rejecting such a multilateral accord out of hand. The Times of Israel reported that the current U.S. approach of putting the Iran nuclear program back in a box, I'd accept that, said Gantz to Foreign Policy in an interview published last week, employing rhetoric used by the Biden administration to describe the goal of the 2015 nuclear deal, known formally as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, also known as the JCPOA. It continued that while Israeli defense officials not in government there have indicated a degree of tolerance for the JCPOA or a negotiated nuclear deal of any kind in the past, that sentiment has not extended to a public official or public officials, and Gantz appears to be the most senior Israeli cabinet member to reflect on the record. However, it is important to note that later on a spokesman for the minister said that Gantz does not support an American return to the JCPOA, but prefers to maintain that Israel would accept some other longer and broader and stronger nuclear agreement. To kind of come back once again to the Bennett meeting, some additional commentary that I thought would be of interest. Dana Weiss wrote in N12 that Bennett chalked up a series of achievements in his meeting with Biden. Foremost among them was the president's clear pledge that Iran would not acquire nuclear weapons, not just on his watch, but ever. And furthermore, the Israeli team got their American counterparts to recognize that if diplomacy were ultimately to fail to achieve that goal, it could also be achieved by other means or other options. Ben Caspit wrote in Al Monitor, an encouraging sign of the trust established at the meeting emerged with the announced appointment of former U.S. Ambassador to Israel Dan Shapiro as an advisor to the team of Robert Malley, the administration's envoy on Iran. Shapiro will be tasked with coordinating positions with Israel on negotiations with Iran, and he is well known to Israel's top echelons and enjoys the trust of many of Israel's top decision makers. His residence and close ties to Israel or in Israel and his connections to the White House will help him forge a quick, immediate, and available link with the Israeli leadership. So we did see a very important and very nice meeting between the two. It was a little bit postponed by the tragedy of the terrorist attack in Afghanistan, where we saw the American soldiers, may they rest in peace and be of blessed memory, die, as well as 100+ Afghan civilians. The Palestinian Authority, kind of changing topics, and once again, please feel free to talk or open up if you would like. Actually, the defense minister, again, Benny Gantz, actually met with Mahmoud Abbas and offered several confidence-building gestures to the Palestinians. And this is really important because it's the first time that a high-level Israeli government official actually met with Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, since 2013 when Shimon Peres did. The meeting is reflective of the Israeli government policy to strengthen the PA. And in Gantz's words, as the Palestinian Authority gets stronger, Hamas gets weaker. And so long as it has governance, we will have more security and we will have to act less. Haaretz, Anshel Pfeiffer from Haaretz, clarifies this, that the defense minister was specifically chosen to conduct these meetings to signal that it would focus on security matters and does not represent diplomatic progress with the Palestinians, which I thought was a very interesting way to position it. The government wants to ensure that Abbas remains in control of the security apparatus in the West Bank, and as part of its ongoing strategy of shrinking the conflict without actually doing anything to solve it, is interested in helping the PA financially. So what was offered in this PA financial support? NIS, $500 million loan toward reviving the collapsing Palestinian economy, and the loan will be taken from tax funds that Israel collects on behalf of the PA, which Israel has withheld in recent years in protest of the pay-to-slay policy of the Palestinian Authority. Israel would recognize, or the recognition of thousands of West Bank Palestinians who lack proper documentation, a streamlined digitized system for VAT, accounting for all Palestinian businesses that make purchases from Israel, permits for an additional 16,000 Palestinians to work in Israel, and approval of Palestinian building projects in Area C. If you walk across, because that's what you could basically do, or if you walk across Israel to the Gaza, it's a little bit of a difference there, although we have seen some protests, some violent protests in the West Bank due to the fact of the escaped prisoners, and Israel putting on some tougher measures on Palestinian prisoners. But in Gaza, Hamas continues to launch those incendiary balloons. They've staged a series of violent protests on a nightly basis just last week alone. And these events have definitely taken the Israelis by surprise, especially following the UN and the Qatar agreement on a mechanism for transferring Qatari aid to needy families in Gaza last week, which was expected to decrease the tensions with Hamas. And we could talk a little bit about that if anybody wants to later on. There's a lot of thoughts about why there's been increased violence in the Gaza Strip. And once again, looking at what a couple of correspondents and people that are very familiar with with what's going on. So Ma'ariv correspondent Jackie Hugi, if I'm saying the name right, explains Hamas's rationale. Quote, "We'll heat up the border," they told themselves, "maybe even come to a round of fighting, but we will get our message across. As long as Gaza does not get what it deserves, Israel will not enjoy quiet." Alex Fishman notes that Hamas leaders wanted to guarantee that the Gaza issue is a central topic of conversation between Biden and Bennett when they met, and they expected the United States both to put pressure on Israel and to take a financial role in rebuilding the Gaza Strip. Amos Harel disagrees, explaining that when it comes down to colder calculations, quote, Hamas continues to gamble to get the last third of the $10 million monthly grant from Qatar that Israel is vetoing because it is earmarked for Hamas civil servants. And it wants to force Israel to lift the restrictions on the flow of goods through the border crossings that it imposed at the end of the last operation. So what's next? The head of the Southern Command, Herzi Halevi, expressed his sense that another escalation is not necessarily imminent. We see, he quotes, "We see that the tools that they have chosen to use, those are the tools for signaling and not for war." But he qualifies, quote, "If Hamas chooses along the way to another round of escalation, I think that the IDF's capabilities will show them once again that they may have a lot of talk, a lot of declarations, but very few achievements." Perhaps validating the causes of the recent violence that I noted before with Hugi's comments from Ma'ariv is that Israel will not enjoy quiet if the Gaza doesn't get what it wants. Well, the Israeli government indeed announced recently that it would lift restrictions on Gaza to encourage quiet, including expanding the fishing zone, supplying more water, allowing in more goods, and extending entry permits to 5,000 more Gazan merchants. Interesting that no one talks about is the tough stand that Egypt has recently taken on the Gaza Strip. I was reading that Egypt, where its forces actually pumped toxic gas into some of the Gaza Sinai smuggling tunnels, killing 3 people. It has actually used this tactic in the past with similar results, but once again, people do not usually focus on the Egyptian side of Gaza. They only usually focus on the Israeli side. Also, Egypt did shut down the Rafah crossing for a time as well. To move, should I stop? Any questions, any comments? Yes, thank you. Baruch Hashem. Yes.
There's 17 other people who are Zooming, so mention to them they can't hear me, they can speak to the community. If they want to send a question through chat, tell them to send a
Great.
question, and I can ask.
So the rabbi is saying for those 1,700 people that are watching via Zoom. No, we actually have a nice crew on Zoom. If you have any questions, just write in the chat. The rabbi said that he will look at the chat and will ask those questions. I think I saw a hand up in the way. Yes, I know. And I'll repeat the question.
For me, it always seems to be an obvious political tactic to bolster relations with the PA and the West Bank. And there's a strong division between someone that you can discuss molecular cooperation with. There has been a lot of security cooperation, despite all the other things that they have that separate them. And Gaza, which you're really is the one that's there's lots of reasons for arrest in Gaza. It's very difficult for Israel to reward all that poor behavior by making it better. And to show Gaza what can happen if they would behave themselves a little bit, are showing benefits against the things that are offering PA and West Bank, or heads and shoulders of what they're offering.
Yeah, so I completely hear what you're saying, so let me see if I could just paraphrase it really quickly, is that Israel, are you saying that they sort of have a partner in the West Bank, or?
Well, at least they talk.
Yeah, so there's.
And they recognize the benefits of expanding the Palestinian economy in the West Bank, which, obviously is beneficial, ultimately to both sides. That's not what we're offering Hamas, and they can't reward Hamas for, the way they're behaving and give them the same benefits.
Yeah. So basically the comment was that the Israelis understand the need for a stronger PA, and that's why they were giving them some of the things. That's why Gantz was there, because a stronger PA at least, has some authority over what goes on in the West Bank. And that at the same time, the Israelis really shouldn't be rewarding Hamas because of what Hamas does in the Gaza Strip. But yet at the same time, I'm noting that Israel just expanded the fishing zone, added some water and some other things as well. It's a catch-22. It's a carrot. Sometimes it's a carrot approach. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And Israel also with its conversations. We just saw Bennett go to Egypt with Sisi. They met at Sharm el-Sheikh, as well as their conversations with other Arab leaders, and the United States too. Israel has pressure on them to at least try and curtail mass issues. And at the same time, if you live in southern Israel and you're getting rockets sent all the time, if by extending the fishing zone by a couple miles quiets it down a little bit, people are happy to keep that type of status quo. But until there is real change in leadership in Gaza, we're going to continue to see exactly what we've been seeing over the past 10 years. Yes, Chad. Oh, he has a microphone. Wow, we go very official.
Does anyone else have a question here or over chat?
Any other questions here or on the chat?
I have a question. I want to say that if you're joining us over Zoom, you want to send your question via chat, I could ask it to Todd. So please consider doing that. Like I said, we don't have these Todd talks throughout the year. It's only once a year. So it's a
Have that question right here, and you can see.
yeah, right. Just like I said, send it via chat. Share it, and I'm happy to ask him the question. But I do have a question myself,
Okay.
Mr. Richmond.
I'm ready. I gotta get a little bit more. I just woke up from a nap. I apologize. I gotta.
Right. Yeah. 3:30 is Todd's normal nap time, so we really appreciate this
I
all the
just
more
fell
so.
asleep. Viewers wait. She's like, oh my gosh, 3:30. Get up.
All right. So we heard about this great escape from the prison, right? The
Yeah.
high security prison up north, which on its own is just very disturbing. I understand was it 5? It was 4 members of Islamic Jihad and then a 5th member of Al-Aqsa's Martyrs Brigade, right? I think it was 5 prisoners total who escaped.
5 or 6, yeah, and
I don't remember the exact. It was 5 or 6.
Yeah.
You're right, but they didn't catch them all, right? Am I correct in that a few of them are still at large?
I think, if I'm correct, I think they've captured 4, and I think there are 2 still at large.
Which in itself is very. I mean, it's like the plot of a Fauda episode, and I mean these are hard.
Avi Isaacar, if you're listening, listen to the rabbi.
Right. No, but this is serious. I mean, we're not talking about like car thieves or pickpockets that are sometimes put in Israeli prisons who do work, let's say, for Islamic Jihad or Hamas, but stealing cars for terrorist attacks. But these are specifically people who planned terrorist attacks.
And the Israeli prisons are much different than the prisons here in the United States as well. I mean, prisoners have a little bit more leeway in terms of what they can do there. And listen, the Israeli prison department, or whatever you want, Department of Prisoners, I mean, they fell asleep at the wheel here, and that's one reason why they kind of put these extra rules on some of these prisoners, and that's all of a sudden why you saw that there were people in the West Bank that started rioting because they wanted their brothers, their sisters, their relatives, their people to be able to have those certain rights of a little bit more freedom of movement in the jails. I mean, look, they used spoons, and they started digging last November to basically get out of jail.
It's a plot from the Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah. What I will tell you, something that really did trouble me is that, I don't know if anyone saw, but the JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, they actually put out an Instagram post or a tweet that basically equated what those prisoners did compared to what some Jews did digging out of one of the camps during World War II with a spoon as well. They said, these prisoners escaped and these prisoners escaped. What you do to escape whatever it is. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, this is what some people are actually thinking. Remarkable.
Someone asked a question. It's Kim Kleppel. So she wants to know, is there any realistic hope for a change of leadership in Gaza in the foreseeable future? Is there a realistic danger of Hamas getting a foothold in the West Bank? So
first of all, Mom, we start dinner, we eat at 7:45 tonight, just so you know. So no, I really don't think that there is any hope for any change in government or leadership in Hamas. If anything, what I always find amazing is that during this time, when we see a brief war, is that Hamas gets stronger, and they really rule with an iron fist. We've seen other times where we have seen maybe Islamic Jihad have an opportunity. That's not happening. But
they're just as bad.
Say again?
Well, Islamic Jihad is just as bad.
Just as
Hamas.
bad. The PA has no say there, although they do have some people that are there. Right. I see nothing. I see no change whatsoever, and I don't see a change for a very long time.
Right.
Yes. So the question was, is there a viable alternative to Hamas?
If there was a viable alternative, would the people vote for it, or would they still choose to vote for Hamas if there was to be an election?
Yeah, so, it's interesting, because remember, Hamas got elected.
Yeah.
But
in 2005.
Yes. But from what I remember during that time, and this is why the Muslim Brotherhood also won in Egypt, was that there were a lot of parties running, right? So in Egypt, when the Muslim Brotherhood took over, before they were removed from power, you had, I don't even remember, 10, 15, 20 parties running that were more on the liberal side, if that's what you want to call it, and then you had the Muslim Brotherhood. And so it's not like they had a huge mandate, but yet they got the most votes. It's the same thing from what I remember happened in Gaza, that there were a lot of people that were running, and Hamas was able to get control, because there wasn't just the PA versus Hamas, it was the PA as well as a lot of others. And I'm going to double check on that and I'll let you know. But I think that was one of the reasons why Hamas won that election. Listen, I think that if there was real democracy there, that the people of Gaza, if they really could kind of, look in the mirror and kind of look at what has become of that area since the Israelis have, evacuated, I would hope, I would pray to God that they would elect somebody new, because it hasn't been beneficial to them. I mean, the other thing also is that even though I would never want to live in Gaza, and I feel for the people that live there, I mean, and I've been pretty close to the border numerous times. It's the same thing even with pictures in the West Bank. It's not as horrendous as people make it out to be. I still would not want to live there. But even when I was in Ramallah several years ago, it's shocking to see, mansions and stores and businesses and malls. It's not the picture with what everybody sees, right? And so, hopefully people can get a better life. One of the things that's going on right now, because look, majority of people do live in poverty there, and the Qataris right now are working with I guess Hamas or whatever to try and give, I think, $100 a month stipends for people that are in Gaza that suffered from the most recent escalation of violence that was over there. The Hamas was very excited that there was going to be money coming in, but then they didn't realize that they were going to be like debit cards. Because if there's a debit card, you can't skim money off of it for whatever else you need. So all of a sudden now, some of this aid that's coming into Gaza is kind of being pulled back, and there's some issues that are going on there.
Can I ask a question also?
You're the rabbi.
Well, thank you. Okay, and again, anyone who wants to ask it over Zoom. There's also probably who are streaming, by the way. That we can't see because that's a stream on YouTube. But you talk about there's probably not going to realistically be a change of leadership in Gaza, just like I don't imagine there'll be a change of leadership in the West Bank with the PA. But here's my question. So you had this most recent election in Israel where Bennett and Gantz formed this coalition, and it seems to be holding for the time being, right? They may have finally ended the cycle of elections every 6 to 8 months. But it's still very shaky, and there's problems, of course, with the coronavirus and things that, sort of making them unpopular right now. Wouldn't it make sense, while Bennett is in power right now with his allies, and they have this coalition, to sort of form some sort of law in the Knesset, like we have in the United States, that nobody can run for election for president for more than 2 terms or 10 years, right? That is the cap. They don't have that in Israel.
No.
Which is why Netanyahu was able to run all these times and effectively hold the election process hostage. So they talked about instituting that now that they control the Knesset. They have the coalition, but I haven't heard anything about that.
Yeah. So first of all, so Abbas is in the 14th year of a 4-year term. So, and he actually was supposed to have elections recently and pulled back on them, which probably was not in many ways a bad thing, right? Because the PA is unpopular, and if they were having elections, it's like the same thing that Rob was just asking about, Gaza. People are very upset with the PA in many instances in the West Bank right now, right? They also they've been really ruling with an iron fist lately. They've actually a reporter that they just basically killed, and so all of a sudden you see I think it was a reporter. They see all these riots that are going on. So, Abbas and these guys, the PA, are not that popular either. So in many ways, they were happy with that. We were talking before, when we came in, about how people in Israel feel refreshed that Bennett is now the new leader.
Right. But the coalition could fall at any point.
It could fall at any point. But as I said before we started, listen, whether you like Netanyahu or not, he was there for too long.
Right.
There should be no leader that's there that long, whether it's a president of the United States or a prime minister of Israel or, a prime minister or a premier or whatever it might be in another country. You look at Erdogan, you look at Putin, you look at Xi, in China, you look at so many other countries. These are people that continue to rule. That's not what a democracy is all about. Yes, Netanyahu was not like them. He was duly elected to be prime minister of Israel through coalitions, and for that's a very exciting thing, because you don't see that anywhere in the Middle East. You don't see that in a lot of countries. But at the same time, if you want fresh ideas, if you want fresh thoughts. You need new. And hopefully they can figure some way to do that. But, no one was willing to really challenge him in Likud. And listen, King Bibi, he had a cult of personality that people loved to follow. He kept Israel safe, which was the most important thing for, any leader in a country, especially if you live in the Middle East. The economy did well, and people felt comfortable, right? They felt comfortable with what they knew, not with what they didn't. Bennett winning, with Lapid. I mean, let's not forget it was Yair Lapid who had, more seats than Bennett did, and he basically took a step back, although he will become prime minister in less than 2 years if the government holds. Formed a coalition government. I mean, listen, they formed a coalition government with Arab parties. That is how they are, how they are ruling the state of Israel right now. Actually, I didn't read it yet, but Bennett was just named one of the 100 most influential people by Time magazine, and I believe that the leader of the Arab Party, the joint list over there, wrote, I gotta look, because I just saw it last night, wrote the blurb about Bennett. I mean, that's remarkable. And the other thing about this government falling, no government really wants to fall because they have benefits, right? I mean, they get the ministry, they get to be able to, lead their party, they get to lead the people that they represent. So they have no urge, they passed a budget on time, they have no urge to form a new government and to hold new elections. And I personally hope that this government stands, because I think also you have, right-wing parties, and you have, Arab parties. You have leftists, you have rightists. I mean, this is a very diverse cabinet, very diverse coalition, which is something that, is a beacon of light for especially Israelis and Jews around the world to talk about what Israel has to offer and set it as an example. Which, let me just kind of bring to a different part. One of the really interesting thing that's happening between the United States and Israel right now is additional military cooperation. And, one of the things that's really important is that even if there is tension sometimes between the United States and Israel, we realize that Israel is a very important ally, and that military cooperation, intelligence cooperation is really important. I actually heard Ambassador Dermer, or former Ambassador Dermer, speak the other day, where they were talking about, a little bit about the withdrawal from Afghanistan and how it makes Israel that much more important in the relation with the United States. And the reason why is because as America pulls troops out of the Middle East, whether it's in Afghanistan or the talk with Iraq or even in Syria, and they don't want to send troops back, they know that Israel is that bulwark, right? It's that, in many ways, it's the front line. And it's really important that the cooperation militarily stays strong. So one of the things that's really unique for the first time ever is that the United States Central Command announced that CENTCOM has assumed combatant command responsibility for the U.S. forces in the state of Israel. CENTCOM, which is the military sphere of the Middle East, never had Israel in it, mostly due to the objections of the Arab countries. Israel was in the European sphere. That's how they try to coordinate it. And it was not a very efficient model. But it's really important to note, and this was something that President Trump talked about and said should be done. And then this January is when it was basically initiated. And so now, as I said before, that Israel was part of the U.S. European Command, known as EUCOM, once again to the belligerency between Israel and the countries that were in CENTCOM, those Arab countries. Historically, it was placed under European command, once again due to those objections of the Arab countries, but with the signing of the Abraham Accords and the beginning of the normalization process between Israel and the Gulf countries, it just paved the way for Israel to be put in CENTCOM and into that regional security architecture. This move will integrate Israel into the U.S. regional security architecture, which will help Israel more effectively address security threats and challenges. It also signals a deterrence to adversaries in the region. In addition to CENTCOM, we've also seen Israel and the United States work together much more on some additional military joint forces or joint procedures that are out there. Military exercises, thank you. So the Israeli Navy and the U.S. Naval Forces of Central Command's 5th Fleet just had their first joint military exercise, Noble Waters in the Red Sea. IDF head of naval operations, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, said recently, quote, that the partnership with the 5th Fleet is a strategic partnership for the security of the region and the state of Israel. This exercise marks the beginning of a cooperation that will expand and increase the scope of defense and security in the maritime arena to prevent terrorist activities. In addition, the Israeli Air Force and the U.S. Air Force Central Command, AFCENT, a lot of good acronyms here, conducted its first of the kind aerial exercise named Desert Eagle. And according to the IDF, the air crews practiced various operational scenarios in the air, including joint exercises against ground, aerial, and combined threats while striking designated targets. And this historic cooperation between the Israeli Air Force and AFCENT is another example of the long-standing allegiance and strategic alliance between Israel and the United States. So it's really great to see that Israel now is in CENTCOM, and to see the increase of the military cooperation and military exercises for the United States coordinating this with Israel. Very important for Bennett as well. And one of the things that I talked about a minute ago about the United States leaving Afghanistan, and we can have many talks on this, but some people say that with the United States leaving Afghanistan, it's leaving an ally, it's taking troops out of the Middle East, will America stand by its allies? And for Bennett right now, and Israel, for Iran to see increased military cooperation like we're seeing here between fleets and Air Force, as well as CENTCOM, that is a real signal as well to Iran, which is really important. And much of this came out also because of the Abraham Accords. And just a week ago, it marked the one-year anniversary of the historic signing with the UAE and Bahrain. And just in time for that anniversary, Bahrain's Undersecretary for Political Affairs, Sheikh Abdullah, visited Israel. And there were some fun highlights. Sheikh Abdullah met with President Herzog and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, which was great. And even though I know the rabbi does not like scuba diving, right? Didn't you say you didn't like scuba diving today in your speech?
I've never done it. I would love to do it.
You never
but if it was a choice between scuba diving or spending more time with my family.
Yeah, wait, let me just look to see. Yeah, oh, here it was, yes. Sorry, in the rabbi's sermon here it talked. No,
but it is on my bucket list.
Yes, it was on your bucket list. But just so you know, see, if you were in the Israeli government, in a unique gesture, Foreign Minister Director General Alon Ushpitz took Sheikh Abdullah scuba diving at Rosh Hanikra, which is kind of interesting. I mean, it's great to have all these things, but this is really showing.
Rosh Hanikra's up north, all the way up north.
Well, that's where they went scuba diving. You go scuba diving up north, you go scuba diving in the south.
Huh, interesting.
So, and the fish. Meanwhile, Saul, I thought you would appreciate the naval exercises because I know you've been on an aircraft carrier, which is very cool. If anybody wants to see some cool pictures or some cool stories, talk to him about that. What was even more surprising than going scuba diving and being on the rabbi's bucket list was that the Bahraini diplomat actually met with the head of the IDF Strategic Planning Division, Tal Kelman, who's responsible for the military strategy vis-a-vis Iran, and actually agreed to be photographed with him. So you really see a melting of hostilities between Israel as well as some of the Arab countries that are out there. Khan News correspondent Roy Kais, I have no idea if I'm saying the person's name correctly, commented on the rarity of an Arab diplomat agreeing to meet an IDF officer publicly, tweeting, until a year ago, publication of a photo like this would have been a figment of our imagination. as well as another thing, a big addition of peace this year, or at least a big week for peace, was when Foreign Minister Yair Lapid also traveled to Morocco this week in a first such visit by an Israeli foreign minister in 20 years to inaugurate the Israeli representative office in Rabat. Lapid met with the foreign minister of Morocco, Nasser Bourita, and signed 2 trade, economic, and cultural agreements. And Lapid announced as well that both will open embassies within the next few months. A really interesting way to see just from a year ago where Israel was standing in the Arab world to where it is today. So let me stop there, see if there's any.
Are there any questions over Zoom, our Zoom feed, or any questions people have here in the room?
Yes? We got one in the front row.
All right, Dr. Freund.
Conspiracy magazine activity. I read that Iran had accumulated 10 kilograms of uranium at 60%, which is 1/4 of the way to the atomic bomb. And in that same magazine, they suggested that it could be, in best case scenario for Iran, worst case for the rest of the world, it could take them a couple more months to get to that point. So the question I have is, let's say this is student magazine is probably looking at this.
No, it's Rob is talking about the fact from some, actually it's not a conspiratorial magazine. I mean, it's out there that there's 60%, there, in terms of that, the produced uranium that you're talking about, and that they could be several months away from, That's why I'm only speaking at Old Westbury Hebrew congregation and not sitting in government. Rob said, well, what do we do? I mean, look, there is no doubt that the Israelis, have their plan B and plan C and plan D. It's a great question. I don't know. The Iranians just a few days ago led agreed, I think it was either monitors or some other type of mechanism to kind of push back on the international community, really condemning them on this specific situation. Will they do it? Or will they just kind of, dangle it in front of them? I don't know the answer. And I have to respect what Biden says in terms of, and the Secretary of State, that, not on their watch will Iran get a bomb. But then again, am I really so sure that the United States is going to, attack Iran, on this issue? I think they're trying to work as much as diplomacy as possible. I don't think it's right that the world relies on Israel to stop Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, because it's not just Israel that will be threatened by this. This is countries around the world. This is the Arab countries. That's one reason why you see the Abraham Accords. That's why you see, even in the Olympics, we were talking about how well Israel did in the Olympics during the rabbi's sermon. I'm joking. I'm joking. That was not during the
You're
sermon.
on fire.
It wasn't during your sermon. I'm joking. But
no, you were sleeping during my sermon.
No, I wasn't. It's not that it's just up here. I mean, the fact I pulled out the scuba diving thing is pretty impressive. Look, you saw, I think it was in a judo match where an Israeli, judo person, was holding hands with someone from Saudi Arabia, after the match. I mean, these are things you wouldn't say. This is not just Israel that feels threatened. These are the Sunni countries. These are the Gulf states. This is Saudi Arabia. I'm hoping that it doesn't happen, but there is definitely an alliance that is out there between Israel and the Gulf and the Sunni countries not to let Iran get that bomb.
I want to ask one last question, and then,
Yeah.
And then I think Dr. Kreitzer, and then we should probably get to Mincha. But you talk about supposedly at the Kabul airport.
You're blaming the good doctor for
No.
for you cutting me off.
Supposedly it was ISIS that set off the suicide blast that killed 13 servicemen and however many countless Afghanis. So it's not just the Taliban and Al Qaeda now you have in Afghanistan, right? You have ISIS supposedly, right? And there's infighting. Has ISIS ever been able to make inroads into Gaza or into the West Bank that you're aware of?
Not really. I mean, we've seen, West Bank ISIS or Gaza ISIS, maybe a couple of flags, but nothing that you've seen any real, stronghold whatsoever.
Let's hope that stays that way for the
Yeah.
coming year. Dr. Kreitzer, did you want to ask a question? No?
Oh.
Did anyone want to ask a last question either over Zoom, through the chat, or anyone who's here before
Don't
we
be
wrap
shy.
up?
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
Now I'm awake.
Yeah. This is
What
the-
I will say, so I was at a UJA function the other night. Can I just say two things, really important. Oh, I thought you just told me that Joel said I have to be done.
No, I said Joel had a question.
Oh, Joel had a question.
You threw everyone off.
Joel, there are tough times in Israel. There are tough times for the Jewish people, and this is something that Ambassador Derma was talking about. And sometimes we see no hope. I mean, Rob just talked about, the Iranians trying to acquire a nuclear bomb. But if you look at 100 generations back, or however many it would be, how many Jews would love to be where we are today, right? We have a state of Israel. We live in this amazing country where Jews have had greater freedom and success in the United States than in the history of our people. And I really thought that was really an important point that he made. That when we see BDS and we see the stuff on college campuses and we see all these other types of things, how fortunate we are to be where we are, today in this given time. Another thing which I also, I don't know if it's a plug for the organization that I chair, it's no secret. When I'm here, I am not partisan. That's why I gave credit to, when we talked about Israel getting into CENTCOM or the Abraham Accords with President Trump. But there was a great victory for the pro-Israel community here in the United States just a few weeks ago. Marcia Fudge, who is now the Secretary of HUD, Housing and Urban Development, vacated her seat in Ohio, in the 11th Congressional District in Ohio. And it became that there was a race between two candidates, Nina Turner and Chantel Brown. Nina Turner, who ran Bernie Sanders, I can't remember the name of the organization, was a very big leader in that community, has had some very hostile things to say about Israel, was running against Chantel Brown, another African-American woman who was very pro-Israel, actually went on an AIEF trip, which is AIPAC's foundation, to Israel. And a few weeks before the race, looked like Nina Turner was going to win. She was about 35 percentage points ahead. And that was not good for the pro-Israel community. Remember, the pro-Israel community is not just Jews. And then it's not just evangelicals. But there are a lot of people that you would not expect to be members of the pro-Israel community in our country that are not your typical people that you would think. My organization, Democratic Majority for Israel, that I chair nationally, its sister organization, DMFI-PAC, put in around $2 million into that race and really brought to the forefront what Nina Turner was about. And Chantel Brown won that election. In her speech that she gave, she thanked the Jewish community, she thanked the pro-Israel community, and she's going to be a great voice for us. So those are two really, I think, important things to see, that we have a great win in Ohio, that us as Jews today, I mean, as we listen to Stewie Center talk about just, 75 years ago or 80 years ago, looking at, what Jews were facing in Europe, there are bright spots on the horizon for us. And when we feel down and we feel like the world is against us, there's some good that's out there. And we should really definitely feel that way and be proud of who we are. So it looks like we're about to start.
Well, I want to thank you for another inspiring Todd Talk this year.
Thank you to the Freund family for these great signs. Todd
Right.
Talk. I will take this home with me.
Yes, and those who joined us on Zoom, I was told by our chief engineer, Chad, you have to log off You have to log off now. You can't start from Mincha because it's a new link that he's sending, that he's establishing. So log off, and then in about 5 minutes, you'll be able to log back on for the Mincha service, correct?
Gemara
Right.
Chatima Tova.
So everyone has to
Shana
log
Tova.
off, and then you'll be able to log back on by 5 o'clock for Mincha, for the Mincha service. Thank you all very much. And no, wait, people don't have to leave. Where's everyone? We could stay for Mincha.
We're not leaving. We're going to go
Okay.
sit over there in the corner.
All right. Because like I said, in about 5 minutes, we're going to start with Mincha.
Shana Tova. Thank you for all those that
Welcome, Leo.
listened, and thank you for all those that came.